And so as we come to celebrate Savior's Day, we must understand one essential fact. And that fact is extremely important because it seems to separate the African-American Christian from the African-American Muslim. And that is the initial Africans who stepped foot on these soils were Islamic. We have to understand that before we move forward. Number two, we have to come together. We have to understand that Christianity and Islam are attempting to achieve one goal, and that's to bring us closer to the Creator. It is not one or the other.
That's right. That's right.
Because in our families, there are many times or both. And so we have to come to one accord on that. Now, Islam is also important. I said I'm a historian, and that's true. I am also an Africana Studies scholar. And when you talk about Africana Studies, you start, of course, with David Walker and his very significant appeal. But in the modern era, you have to look at Malcolm. The Nation of Islam, in particular, Malcolm El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, is principally responsible for the creation of Africana Studies, Black Studies. And so again, Islam stands supreme when we look at the institutions that we build, the intellectual institutions that we build. The Black nationalist movement would not have taken the shape that it took if it had not been for the Nation of Islam. If it had not been for the Nation of Islam, with the Nation of Islam's discipline, with the Nation of Islam's regiment, with the Nation of Islam's autonomy, and with the Nation of Islam's identification of America's shortcomings. And there were many. And there are many. And so as a result, the Nation of Islam, which gave birth to the Honorable Deen Mohammed, to his independent structure, yes, he became Sunni. And yes, he brought brothers and sisters into the world of Islam. But it was the nation that pushed him along that path. And that path also led to the deep structured theoretical study of African people, Pan-African in nature. And so Islam is extremely important, not only spiritually, but also historically. But not only historically, but also intellectually. This is my 1 year and 1 month anniversary at SUNO. And as director for this very important center, very significant center, what we vow to do, what we promise to you that we are going to do, is to join forces with significant others in the community. And of course, if we go back to through what I've just stated about the historical connections between Islam and the African American community, one of the communities that we will coalesce with very closely will be the Islamic community. And so as we move forward, next year, as we celebrate Savior's Day, we will be working through this unit to make this event even bigger and better than it is today. So again, thank you for choosing SUNO as the Chancellor stated. Have a dynamic Savior's Day. And once again, Assalamu alaikum.
Let's give Dr. Clyde C. Robeson another hand. And Dr. Clyde, we wish you much success in your future here at SUNO. Looks like you're going to lead in the right direction. Okay. At this point, I would like to call Sister Okolo Rashid. She's responsible for the legacy of Timbuktu, but she's also responsible for establishing the International Museum of Muslim Cultures in the city of Jackson, Mississippi. Sister Okolo Rashid.
With God's name, the merciful benefactor, the merciful redeemer, I greet you in the greetings of peace. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much. Let me, first of all, thank SUNO for hosting us, as everyone else has done ahead of me. Thank the Chancellor for her wonderful welcome and her wonderful acceptance and welcoming us here and making us feel comfortable. We really appreciate that. I also want to thank those two departments here that we've been working with, that we just feel that they just really extended all of the hospitality that we needed to really pull this off, and that is Dr. Robinson, who just spoke with you. He's been an amazing partner in this, as well as Dr. Haitham Eid, who is with the Museum Studies, the Masters of Museum Studies Department, been excellent in hosting us here. I want to thank the coordinators and the organizers for this conference here, or this Save This Day event. That's Sister Irene, Brother Nasheed, Salahuddin. They are heroes in terms of pulling something major off with making a way out of no way, in a sense. Also, our brother Nadir Hassan, and all of the community here. I'm just really grateful, and thank you so much for hosting us, the International Museum of Muslim Cultures. I am so happy that Dr. Clyde Robertson came before me, because he really actually laid out much of what you've seen through the Timbuktu exhibit already, right? I don't know how much of the video presentation, did they have the video presentation on at all today? Yeah, I'm hoping that Dr. Eid is here. He said he was headed this way. That maybe we can at least get that presentation shown after this. It's about an 8-minute presentation, and it really gives you the overview of the exhibit. You haven't really seen the exhibit unless you see the overview of Timbuktu and all of that research and all of that history. That is critically important. So I'm hoping you will get a chance to do that. But with Dr. Clyde coming forward, he has kind of laid out the history. So what I'd like to do, rather than talk about what's there in the exhibit, I'd like to talk about, as Imam Mohammed said, the quote that you had from him, we don't want to just look at history to just recall history, but we really want to look at history for its benefit to us now and going forward. So in that regard, I want to talk about what we've been able to do with the Timbuktu exhibition and those amazing resources. So I want to talk about our Timbuktu Human Dignity and Culturally Relevant Curriculum and Community Engagement Program that we've been really, that's been underway for the last 5 years. We piloted that program in one of the poorest counties in the country, Holmes County, and we also piloted this curriculum in the city schools, the Jackson Public Schools. So I just want to talk a little bit about that. Of course, this program, this curriculum program is designed around the important global legacy uncovered in the latter part of the last millennium, which is Islamic West Africa's literate culture. It is preserved in ancient manuscripts rediscovered in Timbuktu, the Republic of Mali, and the whole region, representing a window into West Africa. These ancient documents, which we have on display at the museum in Jackson, Mississippi, that we brought from Timbuktu, very first time these manuscripts had ever left the continent before, except a collection of them were actually hosted at the Library of Congress a year before we brought them to Mississippi and to America, right? These ancient documents reveal that a sophisticated, highly literate culture of scholarship, books, libraries, great universities, a culture of peace, great and master tradesmanship and craftsmanship, music. Most of you might know that we've had researchers that have discovered that this Muslim call to prayer that Bilal, the first Muezzin, did, right? It is, in fact, the birth of the Mississippi blues. Now, we all knew it was, you know, the blues came from Africa. We knew that, right? But there are researchers that have done the research to connect that blues sound to the call to prayer. So that, I mean, that's powerful. So in addition to all of those things, this exhibition and these manuscripts talk about and share with us the great wealth building and the great empire building that flourished in Timbuktu in the region since the 14th century until the colonial era. Please let me be clear. As a civil rights and human rights and African nationalist activist, this general knowledge of the contributions of Africa were not new. However, what was new was the discovery for us, my husband and I, of the lost manuscripts and the depths and breadths of the knowledge. Yet, what was most profound was the opportunity for us to go to Mali and Timbuktu, to actually see with our own eyes and have that experience, and bring manuscripts and artifacts back for the exhibition in, of all places, Mississippi, right? and America in 2006. How awesome is that? Excuse me. This extraordinarily rich legacy and history is told in the Legacy of Timbuktu exhibition outside, which is the cornerstone of our educational program. Now, let me share a quote that of a great scholar, Islamic scholar leader, Imam Deen Mohammed, whom most of us are familiar with. He made an interesting observation. He said to us that there are two leaders in our African and African-American history that best really signify the two extreme poles for what we wanted in America. One, internal dignity. The other one, external comforts or integration, civil rights. That's Dr. Martin Luther King. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad, separatism, nationalism, this whole idea of inner dignity. Both represent the same struggle, though. One movement, one freedom movement, but different strategies. And so that's really what we think the Timbuktu exhibit and the rediscovery of these manuscripts and bringing this Timbuktu exhibit does. It helps now, as Dr. Robertson said, it helps us to now bring this knowledge into the narrative, because it hasn't been in the narrative, right? Yeah. So it's important for us to do that. And so I'm trying to put my little notes together here. So this curriculum, very significant. the curriculum is inclusive of a brief case statement on the African American Muslim community. So I'm looking forward to working with Dr. Robinson to help us develop this, to just really unfold this whole history and get the right research to help to tell this story. But in particular, this curriculum focuses, in addition to many other things, on the original or the early nation of Islam built by Elijah Muhammad, which was later transformed under the leadership of his son, Imam Deen Muhammad, but without the label of the Nation of Islam. The focus of the case statement is centered on the history of the successful community building efforts of the African American Muslim community, and it represents the most profound example of racial healing of present time. I told the Kellogg people that they gave us this $600,000 grant to help to lead their racial equity work across the country. I told them, you know, in these discussions that we've been having, I say that the most profound example of racial equity and racial healing really is the example of the Muslim African American movement in this country. That's right. Wow. In particular, this study focuses on this community's approach to addressing the broad issue of enslavement, racial oppression, and segregation of African Americans. The curriculum examines how their interpretation and approach to the practice of Islam, along with maintaining a culture of independence, self-help, and self-determination, studying and seeking answers from God for themselves away from mainstream culture, eventually brought about peaceful coexistence, forgiveness, reconciliation, and peace building with its European American perpetrators and other ethnic and cultural communities. Also, the curriculum examines how this approach engendered in them a spirit of activism, inquiry, and critical analysis of their environment, and in effect aided them in rewriting the dominant narrative for themselves and in transforming their lives. Specifically, to do justice to the study, it's important to view it from the broader context of self-determination in Islam as an approach to dealing with the issues of racial, cultural, and ethnic harmony and peace building, as well as social and economic justice and prosperity for a historical perspective, from a historical perspective. The interest is to see what can be learned from these communities, from this community's methodology and processes toward the promotion of racial healing and reconciliation and peace building among ethnic and cultural communities, but also toward educational and academic achievement in terms of best practices. Studies show that the American Muslim rank among the highest in educational achievement in America. So this study becomes very, very important. So, very quickly, why is this project important? First of all, it addresses a critical need in education in terms of providing authentic, primary source, non-fictional resources for correcting the misinformation and stereotypes about Africans, African Americans, and African American Muslim and Muslims in general. It corrects and fills gaps in textbooks about the history of the U.S. and African American. To share a quote from one of our scholars on our scholars team, Dr. Steve Smith. He says, "The legacy of Timbuktu Project makes a surprising new contribution to American historical consciousness. This is very much a breaking story, a who knew moment that is substantially important in what it tells us about cultural inheritance and cultural possibility. I think the project has great potential to develop beyond making its initial point about the Timbuktu connection to promote studies of the effects of literacy and cultural pluralism more broadly. Secondly, the project is important because more specifically, we seek to make the case that this best fulfills our national and global goal for a culturally relevant instruction program for African Americans, but also for Africans on the continent and other minority students. Yes, because of the historic Timbuktu exhibit and educational resources, but also because of the program and its unique approach and successful track record. To quote another scholar from the Mississippi Department of Education, he's an administrator there, he is a real advocate of this program. He worked very closely with us in developing the pilot program. But when he was interviewed by our external evaluator, he said, "I was impressed by the museum itself, the content, the exhibit, and the history of scholarly learning that are embedded. I've been working to make space in the curriculum to teach these kinds of things. Many teachers unaware of this content on the history of West Africa. The approach the museum is taking with the emphasis on dignity and pride is so important. The resources they have can help students do more in making choices in their lives. As students are learning about this, they are investing in themselves for a better education overall. We want to create relevance for our students with resources that engage them. This focus on intellectual history is part of that." Thirdly, and lastly, in terms of the significance of the project, the U.S. Department of Education did a groundbreaking landmark Education Equity and Excellence Commission report 2013. Who know about that study? Significant. A study like this hasn't been done for 30 years. It took them 30 years to come to this, and it was broad-based participation, organizations, NAACP, just across the board. This report exposed the appalling inequities in our nation's K-12 education system as the root of the gap in educational outcomes for students. So now we know. What's the issue? Our school system does not distribute educational opportunities equitably, is what the study found, right? What is the challenge? It says that officials, administrators, constituents of all levels of government across the board must attack our educational failings as a moral and economic imperative. This project supports the Commission's recommendations, which was a 5-part recommendation, which I won't go into all of that. But the point is that the study puts front and center the appalling failure of America's K-12 education system. In particular, it says that schools serving high concentration of low-income students, of which the study purports, are at far higher risk in leaving their students unprepared for work and life in an era of global competition than are their white and middle-class peers. What's the need? A serious commitment to and begin instituting structural and other changes recommended by the study to address the scale of the challenge. Finally, why the Timbuktu Human Dignity Curriculum program is important. It's not just for African Americans, but for all students. It targets the most vulnerable students, yet has a special focus on African American students who are in crisis and most affected, as studies show. This project is designed to address what we feel presents an overlooked role for America's school in solving the problem. The challenge of understanding, this is what we have defined as being at the root of the problem. It's the theme, today's theme. The challenge of understanding, educating about and for human dignity is the central focus of this program. IMMC has recognized the connection between the lack of education about human dignity and the social problems that many Americans face, including our children. This social malady of an improper appreciation of human dignity for all is an American phenomenon. Excuse me. That's deeply rooted in its foundation and assumes superiority and inferiority of human worth, human hierarchy. We said racism, right? The project is unique in its approach. First of all, what we say is we redefine the problem as one that goes beyond race, which is the dominant thinking, and it is a problem, but it goes to that of reclaiming human dignity. The program's primary goal is to facilitate a process for human capacity development with a specific focus on unleashing the human potential of students through self-discovery of both their human identity with inherent dignity at its core and cultural identity. So, the project defines dignity as that inherent nobility, honor, worth, that born sense of leadership and self-governance that is the endowment of all humans. The project's approach provides a counter-narrative to America's dominant narrative that strips African Americans and other minorities of their inherent dignity. It presents a rare opportunity for students in particular, but African Americans in general, in specific, to view the African and African American experience through another lens, where academic success and model character and communities are possible. This opens a path to a new mindset and intellectual freedom, to that of the independent thinker and self-determination, the bedrock of our democracy. It's the repetition, to quote Muhammad Ali, it's the repetition of affirmation that leads to belief. And once that belief becomes a deep conviction, things begin to happen. Thank you.
I have to come up here. My name is Imam Mohammed, one of the chairs of the Save the Day Committee. I got some news for some people, and it's not good news. You got to move your car, and it will be towed. A Chevy HAR, license number TJD 980, Louisiana. A Honda Accord WAT 277, Georgia. A Nissan Altima N49 3004, Louisiana, commercial. Nissan Rogue RIM 4365, Georgia. GMC Terrain BOR NM look like 58, Tennessee. Nissan Armada 195 7635, Illinois. You're not supposed to park close to the building, and we've been